she had not spoken his name in 6 years. Not once. Not when Rowan asked why the other children at the valley market had fathers who carried them on their shoulders. Not when Nell woke crying from a dream she couldn't describe, only that there had been a man in it, tall and dark-cloaked, and she had felt something in her chest like a rope pulling tight, but even on the worst nights. When the firewood ran low and the wind came down off the Greymere Ridge, hard enough to rattle the shutters loose from their hinges, and Wren lay in the dark listening to her children breathe and thought, could hate him for this. Even then she did not say his name. She had decided that silence was the only power she had left, and she had kept it. She had been 19 when she met him. It was not met. That was too gentle a word for what it had been. He had come through Ashvale Pack territory at the head of a winter progress, the kind of ceremonial sweep the Alpha King made every few years through the outer packs to remind them who held the binding. Wren had been nobody. She was an Omega with a quiet wolf, the kind that didn't shift cleanly or fully, the kind that made the other pack members look away in second-hand embarrassment. Alpha, a broad-shouldered man named Gorick, had barely acknowledged her existence except to remind her annually that she was a burden the pack, carried out of tradition, not obligation. She had grown up knowing what she was. Lesser. Background. Present, but unaccounted for. The night the Alpha King's party arrived, there had been a feast in the longhouse. Wren had been assigned to serve, which was the kind of task no one else wanted. He had carried plates of venison and pitchers of dark mead from the kitchen to the long tables, trying to be invisible, which she was good at. She had almost made it through the whole evening without incident. She remembered exactly how it happened. She had been turning from one of the side tables when she walked directly into something immovable. A wall, she thought, for one absurd half-second, before she looked up and understood it was not a wall. It was taller than she had expected, though she didn't know why she had expected anything at all. She had not been looking at him. She had been looking at the floor, the way she always did. He caught the pitcher before it fell. His hand closed around hers on the handle, and the moment his skin touched hers, something happened that she had no language for. Something low and seismic, like a chord struck on an instrument she didn't know she was carrying. Felt her wolf stir in a way it never had before. Not the half-hearted flicker she was used to, but something deep and sudden and almost frightened. She pulled back. She looked up. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between confusion and attention, like she was a word in a language he almost spoke. Careful, was all he said, and then someone had called his name, Aldrich, and he had turned away, and the moment was over. She did not speak to him again that night. She finished her work and went back to the small room she kept at the edge of pack territory, and she lay in the dark and told herself it was nothing. The wolf bond was not infallible. Omegas with weak wolves misread signals all the time. She was tired. She had imagined it. She had not imagined it. He came to her room before dawn, would spend years afterward trying to articulate how she felt about that, and she never quite managed it, because the truth was complicated in a way that didn't fit neatly into either of the stories available to her, the one where it was entirely his fault, and the one where it wasn't. She had been awake. She had let him in. A wolf had strained toward him with an urgency that overrode everything she thought she knew about herself. And he had been there, and the bond had been there, and for a few hours in the grey dark before sunrise, she had believed that something was happening that would change her life. It did change her life, just not the way she had imagined. He was gone before the light came. No note, no word. And she went to ask, carefully, quietly, whether the Alpha King's party had departed. The pack member she asked had looked at her with a pity that told her everything. He left at first light. They always do. Went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall for a long time. Then she got up and went back to work, because that was what she had always done. and she did not yet know that anything had changed. She found out 6 weeks later. She told no one. She kept working, kept carrying plates and hauling wood, and doing the invisible labor that omegas did, and she let the weeks pass, and she thought very carefully about her options, which were few. There was no contacting the Alpha King's court. Omegas did not do that. There was no appealing to Gorick, who would have seen this as confirmation of what he already believed about her worth. There was no pack support structure for a situation like hers, because the pack did not acknowledge situations like hers as situations worth structuring support around. When she was 4 months along and beginning to show, she went to Gorick herself. She told him the truth, because she was not a liar by nature, and because she thought, naively, that the truth might matter. It did not. He called a pack meeting that same evening, stood in front of everyone Wren had known her whole life. People who had watched her grow up, people whose plates she had carried, people she had once thought of, if not as family, then at least as the background of a life, and he told them that she had dishonored the pack, that she had gone to an alpha's rooms uninvited, that she was a liability, that she was to be gone by morning. But she remembered looking out at those faces and trying to find one that would hold her gaze. Most looked away. A few didn't bother looking at all. She left before morning. She took what she could carry, a pack, some food, a blanket she had made herself, a small knife. She walked north, because north was the direction no one else was walking, and somewhere around midday she reached the edge of Ashvale territory, and she kept going, and the pack bond snapped behind her like a thread pulled too far, and she felt it go, and kept walking. She walked for 3 days before she found the valley. It was not on any map she had ever seen, which meant very little, because she had never seen many maps. It was a fold in the land below the Greymere Ridge, sheltered on 3 sides by rock and dense northern pine, with a creek that ran clean even in winter, and a small cluster of old structures that turned out, on inspection, to be habitable. Someone had built them a long time ago and then left, and the forest had grown up around them, and now they stood quietly, waiting for someone to need them, and needed them. She spent the first month doing practical things, patching the roof of the largest structure, which would be her home, learning what grew in the valley and what didn't, figuring out how to set traps well enough to keep herself fed. A wolf was little help in the traditional sense. It couldn't run prey down, couldn't shift fully enough to be useful in a hunt, but it was more alert than it had ever been, and she began to realize, quietly, that the pregnancy was doing something to it. Waking it up, perhaps, or waking something in her that had always been there beneath the Omega designation, patient and unacknowledged. The twins came in deep winter. There was no one to help her. She had known this was coming and had prepared as carefully as she could, and it was still the hardest thing she had ever done. But she did it, in the dark and the cold, and when it was over, she lay there with one child in each arm and felt something settle in her chest that she had no name for. Not happiness exactly. Something older and simpler than happiness, the knowledge that whatever came next, she had done this. And they were here, and she would not leave them. She named the boy Corbin because it meant raven, and she had been watching a pair of ravens in the valley pines all winter, and they had felt like company. She named the girl Tess because it was her grandmother's name, and her grandmother had been the only person in her life who had looked at her without the particular flavor of pity or dismissal that everyone else seemed to default to. Grandmother had simply looked at her and seen her. Wren wanted her daughter to carry that. The years in the valley were not easy. They were also not unhappy, which surprised her more than the difficulty did. She had expected survival, but she had not expected the strange completeness of it. The rhythms of the valley, the children's voices filling the small rooms, the way Corbin had learned to track animals with an intuition that made her breath catch, the way Tess could find the creek in pitch dark and had once, at age 4, walked to the far ridge and back on her own, and returned carrying an unfamiliar flower she had never seen before, and held it out to Wren as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Look what the mountain made," she said, and Wren had laughed until her eyes watered. She watched them and she thought, "They are not what I am." Their wolves were not quiet, even before they could shift, and they both shifted younger than any child she had heard of. Corbin at 5 and Tess not long after. She could feel the size of what they carried. It was in the way the air changed around them when they were startled. The way animals in the valley moved differently in their presence. She had grown up being told that wolf strength was hereditary, that omegas produced omegas, that the line ran true. Looking at her children, she understood that this was not entirely true. Or if it was, then something had broken the pattern. Something from the other half of their inheritance. She did not think about him. She did not allow herself to think about him. She had built the valley into a life, and the life was hers, and she would not let his shadow fall across it from however many miles away he sat on whatever throne he occupied. Her children were hers, full stop. Then she turned 26, and a stranger came to the valley, and the life she had built began to shift in a way she had not prepared for. The stranger was a woman, older than Wren by perhaps 15 years, with weathered hands and grey-streaked hair and the particular bearing of someone who had spent a long time living outside of pack structures. She arrived at the edge of the valley on a cold morning in early spring, and she stopped at the tree line and called out rather than entering, which Wren noted and appreciated. Her name was Bryn. As an omega from the south, a wanderer who moved between the unmapped places, and she had heard, through the quiet network such people maintained, that there was a woman raising children alone in the valley below Greymere. She had come to see if company was wanted. Wren told her she didn't know yet, but she made her tea, and they sat at the table by the window, and Bryn talked about the other unmapped places. The coastal hollows, the mountain passes where small groups had gathered, the loose constellation of those who had been cast out or who had cast themselves out and were building something in the spaces the packs had decided were not worth having. It was not a resistance, she said, nothing so organized. It was just people finding each other. Corbin appeared in the doorway while Bryn was talking, looked at the stranger with those dark, watchful eyes of his, and then came and sat at the table as though he had been invited. Tess followed 30 seconds later and installed herself on the bench beside Wren and leaned against her shoulder and stared at Bryn with frank and fearless curiosity. Bryn looked at the children and then looked at Wren, and something moved across her face. "They're extraordinary," she said quietly, not performing it. "I know," Wren said. Bryn stayed, not in Wren's structure, but in one of the smaller ones that Wren had partially repaired. She was useful and not intrusive, which were the two qualities Wren had not known she needed until she had them. They fell into something like a partnership, and the valley grew by one person, and the children gained an aunt of sorts, and life continued. It was Bryn who first said the thing Wren had been not thinking for years. She said it carefully, one evening, while they were sitting outside watching the children from the far side of the valley in the last light. Corbin had shifted, his young wolf already larger than it should be for his age, a deep grey that caught the late sun. Tess was half-shifted, which was something Wren had never seen in any wolf she knew, this in-between form that her daughter seemed to find more natural than either full side. "You know who their father is," Bryn said. It was not a question. Wren did not answer for a long time. The children ran. The light changed. "I know," she said finally. "They're going to grow into powers that won't fit in this valley. I know that, too. And when they do," Wren said carefully, "questions will be asked. The wrong people if you're not careful." Wren watched Corbin's wolf clear a fallen tree in a single easy bound, landing without sound. She watched Tess pause, tilt her head, and look directly at something in the tree line that neither Wren nor Bryn could see, then smile and look away. "I'm not going back," Wren said. "I won't go back." "No," Bryn agreed, "but some things don't need you to go back to them." 6 weeks later, Wren understood what she had meant. He was in the lower valley with Tess when Corbin came running from the ridge, fast, not panicked but focused, and he said, in the careful, precise way he had when something mattered, that there were riders coming up through the northern approach, a lot of them. The kind with standardized gear and the bearing that came from belonging to something large. Wren felt the bottom of her stomach drop out. She told the children to go to Bryn. She told them this in a voice she kept level, and they obeyed, because they were good children who understood the difference between ordinary voice and this important voice, and she watched them go. And then she turned toward the northern approach, and she walked to meet whatever was coming. There were 12 of them. Outriders and soldiers, the kind that moved with the Alpha King's progress. They came through the tree line in formation and pulled up short when they saw her standing alone in the middle of the valley floor, which was, she suspected, not what they had expected to find. She looked at them and they looked at her, and then she looked at the figure at the center of the formation, and the 6 years of silence and distance and deliberate forgetting collapsed into a single point. She had told herself that she would not feel anything, that she had built structures against it, the same way she had built the roofing patches against the weather. Practical, thorough, allowing no gaps. She had been wrong. He looked older, not dramatically, not aged badly, but there was something different in his face from the man she had met in the longhouse, something that had not been there before. She could not have said what it was. He was looking at her with an expression that she recognized, because it was the same one from the longhouse, that strange arrested attention, except now there was something added to it, something she also did not have a name for. "You're alive," he said. It came out strange, not declarative, more like he had been holding the question and had not intended to say it out loud. "Obviously," she said. She watched him take in the valley, the structures, the garden she had put in along the southern edge. The evidence of years of living. "We were tracking unusual wolf signatures from the upper ridge," he said. "My scouts reported. I know what they reported." He was quiet for a moment. His riders had not moved. She noticed that none of them seemed to know quite what to do with this situation. This woman standing alone in an unmarked valley speaking to their king without deference or fear. "Wren," he said, her name in his voice after 6 years of her not saying his. It did something to the structures she had built. She felt them creak. "Don't," she said. "Whatever you're about to say, think about it first." He closed his mouth, he thought. She gave him credit for that. He actually stopped, and she could see him considering, rather than simply continuing to speak over her the way she had watched so many people with power do. "Can I dismount?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes. He came down from the horse without ceremony and walked toward her, and his riders stayed where they were, and she stood her ground. He stopped a few feet from her. Up close she could see that the quality she had not been able to name from a distance was something like regret, or something in the same family as regret, something that had lived in his face long enough to leave marks. "I didn't know," he said. "When I left, I thought—" "You thought I was an omega with a weak wolf and there would be no consequences," she said. "Not cruel, just accurate." He flinched. She had not expected that. "Yes," he said, "that is approximately what I thought, and I have had a long time to understand how wrong that was, and I am not going to insult you by explaining my reasoning because the reasoning was inexcusable." She stared at him. In 6 years of imagining this conversation, she had never imagined him saying that. She had imagined denial, justification, the particular brand of confidence that people with power wore when confronted with the harm that power had allowed them to do. She had not imagined this. "I came because of the signatures," he continued, "and because 2 years ago I found a record of what Gorick did, what he called at that meeting." Something moved across his face that was not grief exactly, but was in the territory. "I have had people looking since then, I thought." He stopped. "Started again. I hoped—" "The children," Wren said flat. "That's why you're here, partly." he said, and then, more quietly, I also needed to know you were alive. The silence stretched. In the tree line at the far side of the valley, she could feel Corbin and Tess watching. She had known they would not stay where she sent them, and she had banked on it because they were her children, and she wanted them to see this clearly. I have 2 children, she said. They are 7 years old, and they are mine. They have my name, and they know this valley, and they do not need anything from you. I know. But they will want to understand who they are eventually. Both sides of what they carry. I know that too, and I will not uproot them. I will not bring them to a court or a pack structure that will decide for them what they are or where they belong. I'm not asking you to, he said, and then, with a care she had not expected, I came here. I can come here again, if you would permit it. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the years she had spent being careful, being practical, building the structures that kept her children safe and untroubled by the world that had thrown her away. She thought about Bryn saying, some things don't need you to go back to them. She thought about Corbin's wolf and Tess's half-form and the way her own wolf, which had been growing quietly and steadily for 7 years, had stirred when she saw Aldrich cross the valley floor, not with the seized urgency of the longhouse, but with something slower and more serious, like a tide rather than a wave. It was not the 19-year-old who had walked into him in the dark. It was not the woman who had been thrown out of her home with nothing. She was something else now, something the valley had made her, something her children had made her, and she could feel the edges of it in a way she had not been able to before. The breadth of it, the depth of it, the fact that what she had been told was weakness had been, the whole time, a different kind of strength waiting for enough room to grow. You don't get to come here and feel better about yourself, she said. That's not what this is. No, he agreed. If you come on this valley's terms, not yours, not the Crown's. Yes, and the children decide what they want from you. Not you, not me, them. He nodded. She could see that this was not easy for him to agree to, that he was a man accustomed to setting terms, and that he was choosing not to be that here, and the choice was costing him something. She gave him credit for that too. Then we'll see, she said. She turned before he could answer and walked back toward the tree line, and she did not look behind her, and 30 seconds later she felt 2 small bodies hit her from either side, Corbin and Tess having decided that standing in the trees was close enough to doing what she'd said, and she caught them both and held them and kept walking. Was that him? Corbin asked against her shoulder. He had Aldrich's directness. That much had always been obvious. Yes, she said. Did you tell him? I told him he could come back. Tess pulled back to look at her face, the way she always did when she was evaluating whether Wren meant something or just said it. Do you want him to? Wren thought about the tide, the slowness of it, the way it was nothing like what she had felt at 19, which had been bright and involuntary and over before she understood it. This was different, something she could look at clearly, something she could choose. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I'm not afraid of finding out. Tess considered this, then nodded, satisfied in the way she always was when Wren gave her the truth instead of a managed version of it. Corbin made a non-committal sound that meant he was still thinking, which was his right. They walked back to where Bryn was waiting at the door of the small structure, watching the riders in the distance begin to turn back the way they had come. Then glanced at the figure at the center, not yet gone, still on his horse, still watching the tree line. She did not raise a hand. She did not signal anything. She let him look. Then she went inside and made supper, and the children set the table, and Bryn poured water, and the valley held them in its quiet the way it always had, earned and theirs, and not borrowed from anyone. Aldrich came back in the spring, and the time after that, and the time after that, and each time he came alone, or with only 1 or 2 companions, and each time he asked the children before he asked her, and each time he left before he overstayed speech, and gradually and without ceremony the valley became something slightly larger than it had been. Not what it was before. Something different that had no precedent to be compared to. On the night of the autumn equinox, when the Greymere Ridge caught the last light and held it golden for exactly the right amount of time, and sat outside the way she did most evenings, and let her wolf rise in the half-shift that had been coming more and more naturally these past months. She had been wrong about what she was all her life, but not wrong exactly. She had been told the wrong thing by people who could not see past their own measures. The valley had known better. The children had known better. And somewhere in the years of building and surviving and choosing, her wolf had grown into the full size it had always been waiting to reach. It was not Aldrich's recognition that had done it. She wanted to be clear about that, for her own sake, because it mattered. She had been becoming this long before he arrived, and she would have continued becoming it, whether he came back or not. But on the equinox evening, when the light was right, and the air smelled like pine and cold stone and the particular green dark of the valley after rain, and Corbin was sparring with his wolf self in the lower meadow, and Tess was sitting on the far rock reading something she had found in Bryn's pack, and Aldrich came and sat beside Wren without asking, the way people did when they had learned the rhythms of a place. She let him. She didn't make it easy, didn't pretend the years weren't the years, but she let him sit. They didn't speak for a long time. They didn't need to. The valley didn't require it. Eventually Tess looked up from her book and looked at the two of them, and then looked back at her book with the air of someone confirming a theory. Good, she said, to no one in particular. Corbin's wolf looked up from the meadow. He held the look for a moment, then went back to what he was doing. The ridge caught the last of the light and let it go, and the valley settled into its evening. And somewhere in the north, the unmapped places continued their quiet work of becoming. And Wren sat in what she had built and felt, for the first time in a long time, that nothing was missing.